What's going on, everybody? I'm Sage, and we're very quickly approaching the launch of Dragonflight. And so, what I wanted to do is just compile everything that I've learned, all of the testing and knowledge that I've learned, all of the different talents and builds and things that I've tried and played with over the Druid talent trees and different synergies and scenarios. I wanted to put it all in just one big video so that you guys can just have the information the same as I do going into Dragonflight, and maybe it'll help you if you're like looking into like what should you try out first inside raids, different type of builds as far as like cleave, AoE, pure single target, stuff like that, as well as just kind of going over all of the different talents themselves and talking about their synergies, how they are landing right now versus they were previously, as well as some of my mindset change on a few of the talents and how they've been reworked. Obviously, our trees have been redone quite a few times, as well as the tuning across multiple of the abilities. So I wanted to make sure to get everything that I can out to you guys. It is going to be a very, very long video, so please stay tuned and watch till the end. However, I do have timestamps that I'll be placing in there to just, place the important portions, sections of the video, so that if you need to just jump to something that you want to know versus going over the full overview of all of the talents and all of the different builds, and you can kind of jump over to that kind of information as you see fit. And I really hope that this helps y'all. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. Feral Druid is looking like a phenomenal class to play. Druid in general is looking very, very strong inside Dragonflight, and it's very exciting to finally start getting very close down to the wire of Dragonflight launching. So I want you guys to be as prepared as humanly possible if this is your decision going into Dragonflight with all of the information that I have. Is it going to be perfect? No, there is no way to make it completely perfect, and there is no sim that's going to sim all of this for you in every single kind of given scenario. And so, obviously, there will be a little bit more of that information given out once the expansion launches, and we have a little bit more logs and stuff to look through for Feral Druid. But I've been testing and playing Feral Druid for a very, very long time, and I think that I have a decent grasp on what's going on, and there's several different variations to go over, so please stay tuned for that, and I hope you guys enjoy the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it, and we're going to start off this first video by going over the Druid side of the talent tree, and then we'll go into the Feral side. So first, let's get into the Druid side. And we're going to start off, like I said, on the Druid side of the tree, and I want to go over what I would select and what I pretty much will typically avoid depending on the scenario. And most of this is going to be a case by case base, and so we'll go over like the generic, this is what you'll probably run most of the time, and then you'll go into like in scenario basis, right? So let's go ahead and start over. On the Druid side of the tree, you have 31 points to play with to optimize your character. One of the great things that they did do for Druids, and Feral Druids specifically, is that they have added a large amount of utility that before was either competing with each other or just simply didn't exist anymore. So we do want to try to optimize to get as much utility as we can. However, in Mythic Plus and just as DPS player in general, you want to try to optimize first for as much damage as you can, second for as much survivability as you can, and third for as much utility as you can. And the utility changes up depending on your circumstances, right? So, starting off, we're going to get Rake, which is one of our main Feral Druid abilities. You're going to get Thrash. Once again, this is more of a modifier bleed. It always kind of has been. And it still pretty much facilitates that role of getting the bleeds across all of the targets so that anything that does increase damage, if you have a bleed on it, Thrash is there for you. We're going to jump down and get Rip. Rip is your strongest bleed by far, as well as it's going to be one of your highest damaging abilities in most scenarios. In single target, Ferocious Bite does fight with it for that number one position on several occasions. However, in any form of AoE, cleave, or anything like that, Rip will be your highest damage. Then we're going to get Swipe, which is your main combo point generation AoE ability. This will, for us, for currently, be switched over to Brutal Slash once we get over on that side of the tree. Then we jump down to this next row, and you have Maim. Maim is typically a PvP stun. It is a clutch stun at some points too. However, it is not going to be better than just having a bash later on, and the reason why is because it still requires you to use your combo points for a stun. The damage that you get from this is not very high. It does have its own internal cooldown of 20 seconds, so it just gives you another stun that you can utilize. I personally will not pick this. Even inside previous seasons, we didn't really pick it. I definitely think this is more of a talent for
PvP specifically. If you needed more stuns inside your comp, though, it is something you can grab. Coming over here to Killer Instincts. Killer Instincts is 100%. You're going to grab all three of those points because all of your bleeds and all of your main abilities are all going to be doing physical damage. You do have a few one-off abilities like Moonfire, Sunfire, if you're going to Weave, that do magical damage, and this won't affect that obviously. But so we're going to take this 100% as well as the passive armor is very nice to have. On the right hand side, you're going to have Iron Fur. Iron Fur is completely useless for Feral because of the fact that you're not going to be shifting into bear to use this ability hardly ever. However, it is a pathway to get further down the tree, and there are scenarios where you will take this in order to get down to Thick Hide, which is the one that's right below it, which is reduces all of your damage by 3%. It stacks up twice, so by 6% in total. So you get a 6% DR. This used to be the Guardian Affinity in the past that you could get the 6% DR from, and now you can just take it. You just have to sacrifice a point in the Iron Fur in order to obtain it. And typically, if you're going to do that, you're actually going to place a point inside Matted Fur, and that's when you use Barkskin or Survival Instincts, you get an additional absorption for 8 seconds. So you get a good amount of tankiness here, and that is an option, especially at the beginning of Dragonflight in Mythic Plus. Being more tanky and survivable is going to be key to progression, as well as inside raid, you're going to want to be as tanky as humanly possible. But the trade-off on this side is going to be some utility later down the road. So let's spin our last 3 points because all of these are broken up into tier brackets, right? So you have to spend a certain amount of points before you can move on to the bottom of the tree. So on the right-hand side, we have Friends of Regeneration. That's a bear heal. In PvP, you might spec into this so that you can bear form and Friends of Regeneration yourself, but you're not going to use it in any PvE environment, in my opinion. Over here, you have improved Barkskin, which is just Barkskin's duration is increased by 4 seconds. Barkskin's still very, very strong, giving you a 20% DR on a 1-minute cooldown, and this just makes it last for 12 seconds instead of 8 seconds. Right below that, you have Verdant Heart, which is Frenzy Regeneration's Barkskin increases all healing received by 20%. Once again, we're not going to be taking Frenzy Regeneration, but there are instances where you could opt into this, and it's for your well-honed instincts that will talk down the line, which this will amplify that Frenzy Regeneration's heal. And then, so the 3 points that we're going to spend, you're going to either go down your healing side for the 3 points, or you're going to go down the balance side for the 3 points. And ultimately, I think you're always just going to go down the balance side initially in the base specs, and you could opt to spend 3 more points on the healing side once you actually get where you need to go. And the reason why you're going to spend it down the boomy side isn't for owl weaving, it's because down here you have astral influence, and this increases your range of all of your abilities by 3 yards. This goes up to 5 yards when you put 2 points into it, and that's where we get our extended melee range that we previously had from taking Balance Affinity. So we're going to put the 3 points in there, and then it's going to open up that next bracket for us. We already went down here, so now we're going to put the 2 points into Astral Influence because that's the whole reason that we actually applied these 3 points going down this side. There is no other way to get across currently. Hopefully that's something that changes later on that allows you to get a little bit different pathing, but currently you're forced to take these 3 points in order to get your extended melee range. On the right-hand side, you have Hibernate. Hibernate has had a few clutch moments. I've mentioned it in previous videos, but like back in Underrot, you could CC the worms, you could CC the spiders that fixate on people. More so recently, you can all the bats that try to turn your allies against you with the Season 4 affix. You could hibernate all of those bats, and they wouldn't do anything after that, right? But more than likely, you won't take this because of the point that you want to spend elsewhere, as well as you have other utility that can kind of facilitate the same function as Hibernate. So let's jump back over to left side because the left side is the feral side of the tree. We're going to take Feline Swiftness, and this increases your movement speed by 8%, and it stacks up to 15%. It's not because we want to be super fast. Being fast is still great. It allows you to get out of mechanics, obviously catch up, go faster, so on and so forth. But the reason why is actually this right here is Primal Fury is essential to Feral Druids. It's one of our main underlying abilities that allow you to play and function correctly as a Feral Druid, which is when you critically strike with an attack that generates a combo point, you gain an additional combo point. Damage over time cannot trigger this effect. So this is pretty much anytime you use a combo point generating ability and you crit, you're going to generate a second combo point. And this means this is the reason why crit is so valuable to Feral Druids, because the more combo points you generate per ability you use, the less energy you need and the more finishers you can get out. So we're going to 100% take that. On the left-hand side, you have Tireless Pursuit. And this is for 3 seconds after leaving cat form or travel form, you retain up to 40% movement speed. It's just not needed. We don't need this in any form because you're already fast. We just took movement speed increasing, as well as you have several other movement speed abilities that will get baseline with dash, or you'll have stampeding roar, so on and so forth, that we'll get later on in the tree. Uh, we are a melee spec, so we want that melee skull bash. This is something I will put a little hint in here, not hint, but just what will more than likely happen is that some people don't realize that in raid you just don't need an interrupt, right? There's the majority of bosses you do not need to interrupt anything. There's very few ads inside boss encounters that you actually do have to interrupt, and so Skull Bash will probably inside our raid build not be selected. However, in the majority of content, Outworld content, as well as Mythic plus dungeons, this will 100% be something that you take. Even in PvP, obviously, you're going to take your interrupt, right? And then after that, we move towards the center of the tree. Center of the tree, you start getting more, a lot of the baseline utility that you'll have constantly throughout all of your builds. And the first option is always between Wild Charge and Tiger's Dash. If you were to try to like optimize how much speed you can get, technically, Wild Charge is always going to be the best. And the reason why is because it allows you several different functionalities to move around the map quickly or the targets quickly or jump and leap over damage abilities that you don't want to touch. So in my opinion, I would 100% take Wild Charge the vast majority of the time. Tiger Dash itself is very, very fast, right? It's a 45-second cooldown, but the problem is that it replaces Dash. So you already have an ability that's going to make increase your speed and make you much faster. That's going to last a little bit longer than Tiger Dash does, but it's not going to be as fast, right? Dash is going to be a 60% movement speed increase versus Tiger Dash is 200, but then it reduces very quickly, right? Over the next 5 seconds. So you're replacing one of your already speed enhancing abilities with another, and so you're not gaining another ability to press for speed, you're just making one work differently. So ultimately, this will come down to a little bit of personal preference. I would say the majority of time take Wild Charge though, especially with the Thundering Affix. The Thundering Affix, if you go into human form and then you have a a mass over macro on your party frames, then you can just make sure that you leap to the person, as long as obviously they're within inside that flying charge range, to eliminate your thundering, which is very good. Then jumping below that, we get another utility ability, which is Soothe. Soothe is our D and Rage. We had this baseline, obviously, for the longest time, and Soothe, it does actually come into play several times in different dungeons. The main one, the main outlier, is going to be the Dragonflies inside Algathar's Academy, where you can 100% soothe those out, and doing that is very beneficial because those dragonflies can still kill people, and you're going to want to make sure you limit their power as much as humanly possible. So, soothe is great. Then we're going to take Stampeding Roar. We're going to come down the center. Stampeding Roar is a very good group wide speed buff for everybody, and it gives you good utility inside a group. Currently, it says 1 minute, and that's because the previous talent build that I had uh, has this talent down here, Improved Stampeding Roar, which reduces that cooldown by 60 seconds, but this one will still be the 2 minute one. Then we come back to where we have these 3 points that we have to spend before we can move on to the remainder of the tree. So before we jump down and just start placing some points, let's kind of go over some of the abilities. So over here you have Rejuvenation. Obviously that's our instant hot heal that we've had for forever. You have Swift Mend, which consumes either a regrowth, a wild growth, or a rejuvenation that can just instantly heal a target for a good chunk of damage. And then our remove corruption utility is locked behind these ones, which this is one of those ones where there are times where you will just spec into this. Dungeons recently that I was playing a little bit earlier would be like Shadow Moon Burial Grounds. When you start fighting the spiders or even the bats that are on the bridge, you have a lot of poisons that will go out, and you need to make sure that people have poison dispels because it's very complicated if you don't, and it's also very dangerous if you do not. There are a couple things on those bats where, like, when they root you with it, you can actually shapeshift out of that. However, you need to assist with the other party-wide damage that's going out, and if you don't have a healer that's capable of removing poisons, then it's very likely that you will be the one to do so, so you will spec into that. Then jumping down here, we have Nurturing Instincts. This one will come into play on several of our builds because we are going to be using some magic damage, especially with Lunar Inspiration, which is our accessibility to Moonfire for Feral. So its magic damage and healing is increased by 2%. So it is giving you a little bit more survivability because you are going to have those free regrowths all the time, but mainly it's for that magic damage, and you'll be sacrificing, once again, utility in order to gain this ability. Below this, you have Cyclone. Cyclone has had a very, very, very few niches across the Mythic Plus area or in PvE in general. Normally, it just doesn't last long enough to be a valid CC inside Mythic Plus or even in raid. This is mostly for PvP. So in PvE scenarios, I would not recommend this. If I didn't state it previously, is a more PvE focused view on Feral than it is for PvP. Jumping over to the left hand side, you have Natural Recovery. Healing done and healing taken is increased by 2%. This is something that it's not bad, but it's not something we're going to typically try to obtain. Healing taken, that's much more like beneficial because then at least we're gaining a little bit more survivability from amping up the heals from our healer as well as our own regrowths. But typically, this is probably something we're not going to take. Same thing going down here with Wild Growth. This is just your AoE heal. It does take you out of feral form if you were to use it, and it's probably something, once again, we're not going to put a point in. Down here, you have improved rejuvenation. Rejuvenation's duration is increased by 3% or 3 seconds. Same deal. This is a healing ability. Over here, though, we do have Sunfire, and Sunfire is split into two parts. It's not the one spell that it used to be. So you have Sunfire. This is the single Sunfire ability if you were to spec into it, and then you have the AOE Sunfire, which is improved Sunfire, where it will hit all enemies within 8 yards of the target that you just hit. This is where some people will try to play Owl Weaving, and it is potentially capable of doing it. It's not really called Owl Weaving anymore. You can call it Star Weaving, you can call it Feral Weaving, whatever you want to actually call it. It doesn't really matter. And the reason why you don't have to call it Owl Weaving anymore is because you don't actually have to go into Owl form in order to utilize this ability because it's not something that requires you to be in Moonkin form anymore. So you can just press this ability and it'll shapeshift you out of cat form and into human form when you press this ability, but then you'll be able to like Tiger Sphere and get right back in or just shapeshift back into cat form and go about your rotation for the rest of it. So it is potentially an option to use Sunfire inside your rotation if you're going to shapeshift it in. However, in most of my testing, it just hasn't been needed. And there are builds where you do get to a point where sometimes you are pooling energy. You're not pooling for very long, but there are builds where you're pooling for some energy and that you could get inside a Sunfire weaved inside that rotation. But most of the time, I would say it's not worth it. And a lot of the times, it messes things up more than it achieves results, right? Especially if you're not used to doing it. I would say if you're not used to it, don't spec into the improved Moonfire or Sunfire. Just go into the one Sunfire. And the reason why you're going to one Sunfire isn't to actually even owl weave, it's to get to the utility that it is locked behind it. So now we have 2 more points, right? 2 more points that we're locked into. So if we wanted to gain the utility, we could start going down this one. But once again, this is going to be very specific instances that you need to have that poison or curse spell. So we're going to put the points in Nurturing Instincts because that's going to increase your damage. So we'll put the 2 points inside that one. I'll actually throw the third one in there to cap it off, but you can always remember that you put a third point in there and you can take that out because you don't have to go further down the tree. If you wanted to, you could take all 3 of these points out of this and you can go into Iron Fur and Thick Hide just like we talked about previously to be more tanky. And see, we still have that point down there, so we're able to take it out and you can get Matted Fur. And that's what we talked about earlier, is being able to go with this full tanky route. This is obviously more defensive versus more damage. And this is only more damage if you actually spec into Moonfire. So the specs that, or the talent builds that don't have Moonfire in them, don't waste your time with Nurturing Instinct. Now that we've opened up the last tier bracket of our talents, the main one we're going to get right off the get-go is Lykara's Teachings, and the reason why you're going to do this is because it's just straight stats. It's 2% of a stat of your form, stacking up 3 times, so you get 6% in total. We're Feral Druids, so we're going to get 6% crit. That's exactly what we need. We need some more crit, right? Because we just talked about how crit is super essential to how Feral's overall performance works, for combo point generation, as well as resource management and so on. So you're going to put the 3 points in there, which leaves you 6 points to play with here at the bottom of the tree. And now you can kind of decide what utility do you want to go with. However, there is one that gives you utility and gives you tankiness, and that's going to be the left side of the tree. And we've actually opened this up with two different routes because we're currently spec'd into the tanky side of this with our thick hide. Um, and you get incapacitating roar or you get mighty bash. Incapacitating roar is strong, especially on guardian druid when you're playing guardian druid because it gives you an AOE stop because you're disorienting everything. It also can AoE interrupt anything that has the capability of being, disorientated. However, for Feral, it's going to shapeshift you out of cat form, and I don't think it's worth it unless there is a specific scenario where you need more interrupts. I think Bash will probably be the main play that we do for the majority of content because it's going to keep you in feral form. It's just a quick little bash. It has an 8-yard range and it's just instant. So I would say it's probably going to be Mighty Bash for the majority of the time. And then this opens up Well-Honed Instincts. Well-Honed Instincts is the known conduit that gave us the most tanky conduit pretty much out of most, probably all specs. And that is anytime you fall below 40% HP, you're gonna automatically cast Frenzy Regeneration on yourself. And you do not have to have Frenzy Regeneration spec in order for it to cast Frenzy Regeneration itself. So we're gonna take 1 point in there. I don't believe you need to put 2 points in it because you have the one ability and it's just that safety netting so that you do not die to whatever mechanic managed to get you below 40% health before you got brought back up. And then we're going to start looking at some of the other utility. We have Typhoon. Typhoon is something we've had for a very long time because you always went balance affinity. I would say 99% of the time you went balance affinity. And Typhoon has a lot of utility, especially in Mythic Plus. Not as much inside Raid because there's fewer things that Typhoon will actually work on inside raids, but there has been things that you've been able to push around there as well. Mainly inside Mythic Plus, this is very good to have. Allows you to assist with either grouping mobs, knocking them away. If you end up getting aggro on something, you can knock them away. There's a lot of affixes such as Sanguine, um, previous Necrotic, which rest in peace Necrotic, hopefully forever. That this Typhoon would help out significantly with, and it was also an ability that for a lot of things would also interrupt it because you just knock them and it would interrupt. So it kind of facilitates the same need that disorient or incapacitating roar did with disorienting everything, where you could Typhoon and just knock them all to interrupt them. Obviously, it displaces the entire group, so you might not want to. However, if you take Typhoon, you can also take something like Ursol's Vortex, and the combination with Ursol's Vortex and Typhoon actually is pretty cool to play with. I love actually having Ursol's Vortex as a Feral Druid because not only can you make sure to assist with crowd control and grouping up mobs, but there are some very cool interactions that you can do with Typhoon because you can Vortex everything and then Typhoon it all to collapse them all together. And that's a combination that I've used several times to group up mobs in a much tighter unit so that we could all just, wail on them collectively together. So out of the two, I would say Ursol's Vortex is my opinion, the one that is better and stronger than using Mass Entanglement. But Mass Entanglement has proven to have its uses throughout dungeons in the past as well. Plaguefall, having Mass Entanglement was very, very good for the first boss because you could just permanently entangle that. In the past, Atal Dazar on the Priestess boss, you can entangle the mobs there and just leave them entangled for forever if you wanted to, so on and so forth. But Your Soul's Vortex, as far as in current content, the one that is probably the biggest shout out for it is that on the last boss in Temple of the Jade Serpent, when you're all about to summon your shadow clones from you, if you put Vortex and everybody just stands in the Vortex, when your shadow spawn comes out, it will just grip them all to the center, which is very, very strong on that last boss. So keep that in mind, and it's a very good tip, by the way. Now you have a little bit of extra buttons to press here uh, that you could have for a variety of different situations. There is one thing though that will increase your damage depending on the build that you choose, and that's going to be Heart of Wild. Heart of the Wild is going to increase your magical damage done from your boomy spells, which is going to be your Moonfire and your Sunfire. And your Moonfire is something you're going to use frequently, especially if you take a Lunar Inspiration. And there are both single target and AoE builds that will take Lunar Inspiration. So Heart of the Wild is something you can spec into for a little bit of damage. You are going to have to like press this before you start the fight, typically, because It takes you out of stealth as well as its own GCD while you're inside a fight. So pressing it in the middle of an opener or something doesn't feel that great. So typically, what I've been doing is I will right before we pull, I'll Heart of the Wild stealth and then do the rotation, do my opener and so on and so forth. It is a 5-minute cooldown still, but it does give you that utility to shapeshift around and do other things if you need to. So if you're in a pinch, instead of just getting that little bit of damage out because of your magical abilities that you're using, you could just shift in one of the other forms if you needed to use this ability. So you could be a little tankier, you could do a little bit better off healing, so on and so forth. So it is a good utility button to press. I don't think it's not going to play the role that it did in the past, where you would go full Boomkin form and use Convoke or something inside Boomkin form to try to get out Starfalls and that excessive amount of damage or anything. I don't believe we're going to be playing it to that extent. This is going to be purely it's just a button that will increase your passive magic damage that you're going to do inside whatever pull you're doing, and that's how I would go about telling and advising anybody to use it currently. However, since we only have 2 points, it's a decision to make, and it's a decision that you can opt in to change around a few points. So if we wanted to take it, I would say taking the improved Stampeding Roar is very good inside Mythic Plus because every single minute you'll be able to Stampeding Roar the group, which is just obviously the entire game of Mythic Plus is go as fast as you can with a 1 minute Stampeding Roar for everybody. Everybody can, right? However, you do have Renewal, which is very tanky. You get 30% of your max health every 1.5 minutes, which is and has saved my life several times inside Mythic Plus, especially when you're progging or you're pushing keys that you're not familiar with the difficulty level at the time or the scaling of it at the time, and you're learning it. Then Renewal is very good to save your life. But typically, I would say improve Stampeding Roar, and then you can take Heart of the Wild. But then you also have on this side of the tree, you have Innervate. Innervate is very, very strong if used in the right scenario. The problem with Innervate is it does take you out of feral form, but it's definitely worth it, obviously, to make sure that everybody can stay healed by your healer. So if your healer is having issues with mana, or if they just, say, hey, you know what, we might be end up pumping out a little bit more heals here than normal, it's probably safer just go with Innervate on this dungeon, go for it. Inside Raid, you're probably always going to pick Innervate because it gives you additional utility, as well as when your healer is about to pop off and do some massive amounts of healing, you can throw this on them and just eliminate a lot of the mana spent, which could ultimately lead to you progressing a boss faster or just killing it faster if you're able to maintain mana for the healers over time. They did recently increase the HP of everybody by 40% to eliminate some of the power of healers in total across the board. So Innervate is probably going to be something you definitely want specifically inside raid, and then it'll be kind of like a case by case scenario inside dungeons. Below this, we have Nature's Vigil, and it's for 30 seconds. All of your single target damage also heals nearby friendly targets for 20% of the damage done. Initially, when in my previous deep dive, I thought it was just going to heal one target for the duration of it, so it's going to pick a target and just heal that target. It doesn't. It will heal multiple different targets over the course of its 30 seconds. It's just going to pick every single time you do a single target damage ability, it's going to pick a target and start healing them, right? It is very strong. It's very passive. It's off the global cooldown, so you can press it whenever you want to. But it is something that you're going to have to, you're going to lose parts of your utility to get it. It is a decent amount of healing across a dungeon. You can provide a little bit of that utility. If you're going to take Innervate, this is very close and easy and powerful to obtain. So you could definitely go with the Nature's Vigil. The last talent on this side is going to be Protector of the Pack. This was obviously changed from the Fairy talent in the past, and Fairy talent, it was busted because it was broken, and instead of fixing it, they decided just to change it. And so this is stores 10% of your damage up to X amount of damage. Your next regrowth consumes all stored damage to increase its healing. I don't believe we're ever going to take this because it is storing up our damage where we're not actually doing more damage. We're actually eliminating some of our damage to do more healing. This would be more so for healers, uh, possibly tanks depending on a build, but more than likely it's just the healer that will ever take this because you're not going to need to store up your damage to put off more off healing with your rerolls. In total, I think that Feral Druid just won't play that talent. Um, However, I do think we will play this side, and like I said, it's going to be scenario based. If you want to pick this side, if you want to try to pump out a little bit more damage, and I mean a little bit more damage, Heart of Wild will assist with some of that. So just real quickly, if you wanted to try to be a little bit more tanky and not as much damage, you could forego those two and jump over here. You get more healing, as well as we already selected the 6% DR and the matted fur for tankiness, but you could also just forego all of this right here and jump onto the side. Put your 3 into Nurturing Instincts. Here, you're going to get all of this on this side. These are pretty much what I would say is what you want 100% of the time. And then you can go into improve Stampeding Roar, and you're actually going to take off your Nature's Vigil to get this, and this would be a lot of uh, more so damage, especially for magical damage. All right. And I think that that pretty much finishes up the druid side of the tree and the things that I wanted to go over with that side. This side isn't as super impactful, obviously, to the core damage and rotation that you're going to be doing for feral druid. But it is where you get the majority of your utility, and it's where you bring your worth to a group. Is dependent on what you select on this side. So if you're greedy and go for full damage with no utility, then you're going to cause a tougher time for yourself inside groups versus you could just go for a full utility and make sure you're utilizing that utility to make the entire group and your spot more valuable. All right, so now jumping on to the feral side of the talent tree. This is going to be pretty in depth. Once again, it's going to be fairly long, but I want to go through all of them, tell you my opinions about all of them, and then the synergies between them. So, first off, we're going to start right off the get go with Tiger's Fury. Tiger's Fury is going to instantly restore 50 energy to you, and it's going to increase the damage of all your attacks by 15%. Currently, it says 27%, and that's once again because in the previous build, I had Carnivorous Instincts, which we'll talk about later down the road. However, this is a 15% baseline ability, and you can increase it with talents further on. It's one of the core things. It also snapshots with all of our abilities. We've had this for a very long time. I don't think I need to go too much more into that. It's going to be your main amplifier to all of your damage. So you're going to go ahead and take that. So moving over here to the left-hand side of the tree, you have Omen of Clarity. And Omen of Clarity is your auto attacks are going to have a chance to give you a clear casting state that's going to make your next Shred, Thrash, Swipe, or Brutal Slash if you take it in if you talent into it, free and cost no energy. It's not going to increase it by the 15% damage that this one shows. That's if you take Moment of Clarity later on down the road. So we're going to take this because anytime that you get a free ability where you don't have to use any energy for it, it's just going to be good for your resources, right? And you want to make sure that you're utilizing those resources correctly because you can use up some of your energy and then use that clear casting state. But typically, it'll probably be relatively passive. You won't notice it as much. You'll see that it procs, but then when you're procking, you're already pressing those buttons inside your rotation. It's just going to make that button free, which is just going to allow you to have that energy not move, right? Because it's just won't get spent. In the center here, we have Primal Claws, and that's your combo point generating abilities have a 10% chance to generate one extra combo point, and this goes up to 20% for 2 points into it. My initial thoughts on this was I thought it was going to be strong, and that's because previously, like I talked about over here with Primal Fury, I thought that it was going to every single time you press an ability, the more chances of that ability generating you 2+ combo points. In this case, it could generate you 3 combo points for the press of one ability. I thought was going to be very, very strong. However, in actual practice and testing it and play, it doesn't proc enough because it is only a 20% chance, even though it does not require it to crit. But even more so than the proc chance just being very low is that there's often times when you proc it when you don't need it. So if you proc it and you have one combo point that you need in order to have 5 combo points for a finisher, oftentimes you just lost everything. Even if that last combo point you already critted on it, so you would have had 2 combo points, so you wasted one technically anyway. If this procs alongside that, then you just wasted 2 combo points. And so there's often times where this will just get eaten up because you won't need as much from this ability. If you had absolutely no crit whatsoever, then this could be a way to kind of mitigate that. However, crit's still one of the main functioning stats for feral druids, and it's something you're going to have, right, in order to play it smoothly and function the way it should. And Primal Clause just isn't strong enough, in my opinion, to facilitate the need, especially for 2 points invested into it. It's just not strong enough. On the right-hand side, we have Primal Wrath, and Primal Wrath is one of the strongest abilities that we have inside Dragonflight by a fairly large margin. And that's because it's going to not only do initial damage, but then it's going to spread your rips across all of the targets. And so in any scenario that you have more than one target in, cleave, mass AoE, this is going to be your main combo point finisher because of what it's going to spread. It's going to spread your rip across, and rip is our main source of damage, especially in AoE, as well as there are several talents later on down in the tree that this is just going to amplify. So you're going to want this in any of those scenarios. People have talked about having this for single target purposes as well, because it's going to apply that same single target rip on a single target, but it's going to do initial damage. However, we are always going to take Circle Knife and Death. And in the previous build, as you can see in blue on the screen, I did take that. So that's why Primal Wrath is currently showing at 9 seconds instead of 12 seconds like it normally would be, because of the fact that Circle Knife and Death is always going to be taken, and so it's 9 seconds, which gives you very little wiggle room to play with. And so, in the grand scheme of single target itself, I don't think that we're going to be playing Primal Wrath, but that is something that could come out in Sims and say, hey, you know what? If you were to be perfect in your rotation and you played Primal Wrath, then it's possible that you could do this. However, I would say, honestly, it's not. And the practicality of actually using Primal Wrath to maintain your Rip Dot, probably not going to happen. But Primal Wrath to maintain your rips inside AoE, 100% possible all of the time. That was specifically for all of your bleeds in single target, is when it wouldn't keep your rip up. AoE 100% will. Super, super strong. Great ability. It's going to be the main core source of us having a little bit of content opened up to us in a little more friendly manner, mainly meaning Mythic Plus, but also this is going to be strong in PvP as well. Going down to the right hand side, we have Double Clawed Rake. Rake also applies rake to one additional nearby target. And the amplifications that you get from your first rake will apply to the second rake as well. So if you apply 2 rakes from stealth, it will stun 2 targets, as well as will do 60% increased damage to those 2 targets because you have the stealth modifier on it. Later on down the road, we will talk about other things that will amplify this rake as well. Inside AoE, rake is one of your main top damaging abilities inside Mythic Plus. So taking Double Claw Rake and being able to apply this to multiple targets is just a net gain, in my opinion, as well as just on the charts, it shows that it is just strong enough to select, especially in AoE and Mythic Plus. In single target, pure single target, you probably will not take this, and there's a good chance you don't take Primal Wrath. So you just won't go on the side of the tree, and we'll talk about the complete single target ones builds later on down the road. So for now, we'll kind of build towards that AoE build, and we'll talk about the ins and outs, and then we'll kind of go over all the builds towards the end. So we'll go ahead and take Double Clawed Rake because through testing, this is what I've taken the majority of the time. Right smack dab in the center is Predator, which is a great spot for Predator to be because in the majority of scenarios, Predator will give you some kind of value. However, it's also your main source to get to either side of the tree if you want to. Do you absolutely need it? No. And it depends on the build. If you go pure single target, you do kind of need it, even though it's not useful in single target to get to the other side because you won't take Primal Wrath or Double Claw Rake in absolute pure single target. But the majority of builds, you could circle around it if you didn't want it. But in Mythic Plus, this is 100% mandatory, I would say, because your Tiger's Fury uptime is super essential, as well as every single time something dies, you're going to get a reset of that Tiger's Fury, which is going to allow you to get more energy, do more abilities, and just be able to fluidly do damage across the course of a dungeon. So we're going to definitely take Predator, and Predator also opens up access to Tireless Energy right below it, which is going to increase your maximum energy by 30 and your energy regeneration by 10%. And this can go up to this double stacks up, so it can go to 60 and 20%, which is very strong if you have both of them in it. You have a massive amount of energy and energy pool coming from that. Typically, in most of the builds I've played, you will play with 1 point into this, but if you're going for the most damage you can get, there are builds that just won't take this, even though it does feel better. So for currently, I'm not going to select this, and we're going to jump over here to Sabretooth. Sabretooth has been redesigned in Dragonflight, where Ferocious Bite deals 15% increased damage, so it's been nerfed just a little bit down from what it was. Um, but it deals 15% increased damage and increases all of the damage dealt by your rip by 5% per combo point spent for 4 seconds. So you're going to get a 25% increased damage across all of your rips or across your rip for 4 seconds at a time. So it's just going to give you a good burst of increased damage for your bleeds. And the uptime of this is actually very essential inside Mythic Plus. But in general, this is going to make all your bleeds stronger, which makes Ferocious Bite a modifier now. It's going to modify your bleeds because it's amping up your bleeds instead of it just being the massive, big hitting ability that it was inside Shadowlands. Now, Ferocious Bite is more, not only does it still hit decently hard and is going to be one of your higher single target damage abilities, but for AoE, it's sitting in more of a modifier uh, ability pool than it is as like your actual damage inside AoE. Jumping up here to Merciless Claws, Shred deals 20% increased damage, and Brutal Slash deals 10% increased damage against bleeding targets. If you have Brutal Slash talented, obviously that's why it says Brutal Slash. However, if Swipe is your go-to spell, then it will just say Swipe instead of Brutal Slash. Single target, this is an absolute must because we are playing Brutal Slash inside single target, just like we did back in Shadowlands. And Shred, obviously, you're going to use that inside single target. So both of this is just a net gain in pure single target. So all of those boss fights, you're going to want this. In AoE, I have been playing around with not taking Merciless Claws because of the fact that in an AoE environment, you're trying not to shred as much. And even when you do shred, it's not doing a ton of your damage. You're mainly doing it to proc your blood talons, which you spec into later on down in the tree. And the only thing that this is giving you really is that 10% increased damage to your Brutal Slash. And Brutal Slash is also, it's stronger than Swipe is, and it's doing a decent amount of damage, but it's not towards the higher end of your ability. So if you're able to spec into things that are doing a little bit more damage for you, then the payoff is there, right? But for the majority of the time, Merciless Claw is going to be definitely present in the majority of our builds. So we're going to go ahead and take it. As well as it's the only way to get to Lunar Inspiration. On the Druid side of the tree, we took a lot of things that amplify Lunar Inspiration.
All right, real quick pause in the talents because, of course, while I'm editing this gigantic video going over all of the talents and builds and so on, Blizzard had to throw in a little curveball and did some more tuning on Feral Druids. And this is a great spot in the video to place it in there because it is about Lunar Inspiration and Moonfire. Um, we we were hoping that they weren't going to change too much stuff up, but they did throw one more little tuning our way, and that is going to be that Lunar Inspiration's Moonfire damage that's cast in cat form has been reduced by 40%. This is a decent chunk nerf to Lunar Inspiration itself, but in total, and one of the things I talk about later on in this video, right after this little short intermission here, is that the strength of Lunar Inspiration isn't really just from the damage that it's bringing, it's from the utility as well as the enhancement to the other abilities that we gain from it, mainly through Blood Talons and having a range combo point generator. So the functionality of it has still stayed the same. It's still something that we're probably going to take in single target, as well as something that's just useful inside AoE. And the further I go in this video, you guys will hear my explanation of that in my opinion. I just needed to really quickly jump this in there because I want to make this as up to date and current as possible going to Dragonflight. And so without further ado, the video continues on.
Lunar Inspiration is very strong because it gives Feral Druids something that we used to have in the past, and that's a ranged ability that's a combo point generator. So since it's a combo point generating ability, it does work with your Primal Fury, and it can generate additional combo points for critting. As well as since it's also a combo point generating ability, it allows you to also generate Blood Talons through using it. Even though it's not a bleed, it allows you to facilitate different ability so that you can proc your Blood Talons. As well as it's also a ranged ability, which our extended melee range makes our Moonfire a 43-yard ability, which is massive. There's very few, if at all any, maybe Survival Hunter with their ability that can shoot out abilities from that far as a melee player. And Feral Druids can definitely do it with this talent all of the time, and allows you to not have to weave as much if you don't want to, especially if you just did a finisher and then you have to move away from a boss for a mechanic. You can Moonfire them to generate combo points. That way, the moment you go back in, you have 5 combo points and you can do your thing. Or if you just moonfire them at range, and then once you're done moonfiring and getting your combo points up, you can shift and do some boomy spells, and then shift back. You'll have your 5 combo points, go back in and do your finisher to get your bleeds back up on the target. So Lunar Inspiration is very strong. There are going to be builds where you don't take this for AoE purposes, but for most single target or cleave, I think Lunar Inspiration will be a go-to ability because of the fact that it opens you up to freely get your blood talents without having to override any of your previous bleeds that you've placed, as well as it allows you to maintain activity on a mob and generate combo points from any range that you are, even if you have to go beyond your extended melee range. So for this one, we're going to take it. On the left-hand side, we have Protective Growth. It's your regrowth protects you, reducing all damage you take by 5% while regrowth is on you. This is very good for PvP. I don't think we're ever going to take this in PvE, and it's because of the points, right? It's because of the amount of points that you have to take. So right here, we had to spend one more point in order to get down the tree, and ultimately that point's going to be either Tireless Energy or it's going to be Lunar Inspiration, but it's not going to be Protective Growth because it's not going to give us the damaging abilities that we need to facilitate our full rotation going down the tree. And now that we've opened up into the second bracket, the very first thing we're going to take is Berserk. Berserk has been changed slightly from its previous Shadowlands iteration, and that Swipe will generate an additional combo point if you were to spec into Swipe. So Swipe does have some value inside Berserk that Brutal Slash doesn't. However, they didn't add Brutal Slash to this, so you're not going to be generating that additional combo point through Brutal Slash every single time you're inside your Berserk. Because right now I do have, even through the blue one, I do have Brutal Slash selected. That's why up here Merciless Strike says it. But then you can realize that Berserk does not say Brutal Slash. However, Brutal Slash is going to still do a good chunk of damage. It's just not going to generate that additional combo point, which does lose a little bit of the functionality that they added to it, which is kind of one of the reasons I'm a little upset that Swipe isn't more of a gameplay uh, currently, and that's because they nerfed Swipe, and then Brutal Slash just started pulling ahead. But we're going to take Berserk. On the left-hand side, Rampant Ferocity, this was a really cool ability when they first introduced it. They did nerf it, and then they reverted it, but then they also still nerfed down Ferocious Bite's initial damage, as well as they nerfed Sabretooth, which buffs up your Ferocious Bite, so on and so forth. And what this does is your Ferocious Bite hits all nearby enemies affected by your Rip. So this is going to be something that hand-in-hand you play with Primal Wrath, and pretty much only with Primal Wrath. There were a few builds that try to take this to just eliminate how you go down a tree because it's 1 point versus over here sudden ambush that we'll talk about in a second is 2 points. But when you actually have a fully filled out tree, once you're actually level 70 instead of like pre-patch, you're not going to take this in single target. This is purely an AoE once you've selected your Primal Wrath. So since we are kind of building an AoE build, we are going to select this. Over here on the right hand side, we have pouncing strikes. Pouncing strikes you have to take in pretty much every single scenario. And that gives your shred and your rake its stealth functionalities in general, which are going to give it its stealth functionalities when you berserk as well. So every time you stealth, Rake is going to have its damage increased by 60%, and it's also going to stun the target. If you take double clawed Rake, it's going to do that to both targets. But then also Shred does 60% increased damage and has double the critical strike and generates one additional combo point. And since Berserk has Shred do damage as though Shred was stealth, then your Shred is going to generate 3 combo points when it critically strikes, and it's going to have double amount of critical strike chance, as well as it's just going to have 60% increased damage, which is typically why in any given scenario, and when you're berserking, you're going to want to shred, finisher, shred, finisher, shred, finisher, and that finisher is just going to be dependent on whether it's single target Ferocious Bite, or it's going to be mass AoE Primal Wrath to keep things rolling. Jumping right below pouncing strikes, you have tear open wounds. Now, this is one thing that I'm actually going to add in here because this was recently changed from Blizzard, where they just put out a blue post the other day that went over and started tuning a lot of the AoE abilities across multiple specs. And for Feral, it was this specific talent, Tear Open Wounds, now deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. Is that super impactful? Not really, because there's not a massive amount of polls that are over 5 targets, and especially not over 5 targets by much, and it's only doing reduced damage beyond those 5 targets. So most packs are around 5 targets, and then You'll see a small drop off, but in overall, tear open wounds is doing about 6 to 7% of overall damage, depending on the dungeon mainly, because there's a lot of dungeons where you don't actually get a whole lot of like massive packs, so you're going to lose a little bit of value from tear open wounds inside smaller packs, and then those bigger packs, you'll see it obviously pop off quite a bit more, but it is strong because it's going to Primal Wrath is going to consume 4 seconds of Rip's damage on the target it hits and deal 60% of it instantly, which is very good. It does mean that you have very limited time to get this one out every single time you press your Primal Wrath, especially if you're going to be spamming out Primal Wrath inside AoE, and that's because your initial Primal Wrath is only going to be 9 seconds, and you want to try to consume 4 seconds every single time you reapply it. So that means you have 5 seconds till you want to press your Primal Wrath again. But Tear Open Wounds does amplify your AoE damage and give you a little burst inside there every single time you do your second Primal Wrath, right? So every time you do a second Primal Wrath, it's going to consume it. The very first one, it doesn't have anything to consume, so you're going to first initially have to apply, and then the second one, it'll start doing Tear Open Wounds damage. On the right-hand side here, we have Taste for Blood. Taste for Blood was a conduit we had in Shadowlands, where Ferocious Bite deals 2% increased damage for each of your bleeds on the target. There's 2 points into this, which means it goes up to 4, which typically you have 3 bleeds generally on a target, which is Rake, Rip, and Thrash. And so you're going to have 12% increased damage across your targets that you can bite and do increased damage. So for single target, this is a definite go-to talent. For AoE though, because of the fact that Ferocious Bite is playing a modifier role inside AoE where it's increasing your bleed's damage is the main reason you're doing it, you're not going to select Taste for Blood inside AoE because of the other talents that you can select, especially since this is 2 points and we want to get down the tree to the talents that are going to be our bread and butter for, that are spec defining, I guess you could say. So the last one on this row is going to be Sudden Ambush. And Sudden Ambush, I've mentioned before in my videos, I liked where it was inside Shadowlands as far as like the idea behind it. Didn't have a way to modify Rake anymore since they changed the way Blood Talons worked, where previously you could have Blood Talon procs utilized on Rake, and now it only goes on finishers. So Sudden Ambush was a way to amplify your Rake damage, but it's still a chance. But they did amplify that chance significantly. So initially, if you put 1 point in it, you'll get a 25% chance per finisher to generate a proc of Sudden Ambush, which is going to allow you to have your Rake deal damage as if it was stealth. So you're going to have a lot of things that allow you to do that. So regular stealth will allow your Rake to do damage as if stealth, obviously. Berserk window, you obviously don't need to have the Sudden Ambush procs, as well as now, Sudden Ambush will allow you to do it throughout your rotation, and once again, Rake is one of your highest damaging abilities, especially in AoE. So, having some value or some points given into Sudden Ambush is definitely worthwhile, but there are things that you have to trade off with it. But in most of my builds, I do put 1 point into Sudden Ambush, so you get that 25% chance to proc it, which allows you to get additional damage. Jumping down to the next row, we have Predatory Swiftness. Now, Predatory Swiftness is something that Feral has had for a very, very long time, which allows you to cast a heal, a free heal, in this case, a free regrowth, anytime you use a 5 combo point finisher. It's a free regrowth or it's a free Entangling Roots. And Entangling Roots, sure, it wasn't the ability that we used the majority of the time. Normally, you just use it on regrowth to heal yourself or your party members, but there are certain scenarios, like in Shadowmoon Burial Grounds on the first boss, you can root that ad for free pretty much, and you can continuously root it until it just disappears, and you can ignore that ad completely. So predatory swiftness does have value inside Mythic Plus scenarios. There are ads that you can root inside boss encounters um, historically. However, there might be better means of CCing inside that specific scenario. But predatory swiftness you have to take in order to get down this side of the tree anyway, so you're going to take it. Jumping towards the center, they gave us a lot of options right here in the center that are pretty decently strong. Moment of Clarity is something that used to be one of our end tier talents, and that's Omen of Clarity triggers 50% more often and accumulates up to 2 charges and increases the damage of your next Shred, Thrash, or Brutal Slash or Swipe if you don't have Brutal Slash by 15%. So it's giving you a lot more energy regeneration because you're getting a lot more free abilities, as well as this one's allowing you to have your Brutal Slash, and it's making sure that you don't waste any of your Omen procs by allowing you to accumulate 2 of those charges. It is a very strong talent. However, there are a lot of builds where we might not pick it just because of where we're going to allocate points. And ultimately, it's going to be the point that you place inside your sudden ambush in AoE specifically. And the reason why is because it's which damage would you prefer? Would you prefer amping up one of your generally your third highest damage, your third to second highest damaging ability by 60% that you can put on 2 targets at a time? Or would you do it to your abilities that are not in that upper bracket of your damage profile by 15%? And when it comes down to that damage profile, sudden ambush will typically just win. But both of them are proc based chances. I would say Omen of Clarity does proc more than 1 point in a sudden ambush does typically. However, the damage you gain from sudden ambush, in my opinion, outbeats Moment of Clarity. But the energy regeneration from Moment of Clarity obviously is 100-fold over Sudden Ambush because Sudden Ambush doesn't give you any. So this is going to be where you kind of decide between energy regeneration and damage. Typically, in this scenario, I would say you go with the damage. We were just talking about Sudden Ambush and Rake, and Infected Wounds is something that has been opened up and available to us. This is its new position from where it used to be over here hidden behind Sudden Ambush, and that is Rake's damage is increased by 30%, and Rake causes infected wounds in the target, reducing the target's movement speed by 20% for 12 seconds. This is obviously very strong because it's increasing, once again, one of our highest damaging abilities, but now we have that 30% increase happening to 2 targets at a time, while we can also amp it up by 60%, as well as it does give you a little utility with reducing target's movement speed. It's not by a ton, and honestly, the movement speed isn't something we're drastically going towards here. It's not as noticeable because it's only 20%, but you will be able to get this around most of the mob because you're going to be placing your rips across, or your placing your rakes across multiple targets. So very strong ability both in AoE and in single target. Even if you didn't take double claw rake and pure single target, this is going to be very strong because it's just increasing one of your main bleeds by 30%. Jumping across the way here, we were just talking about increasing a bleed by a massive amount, and Rip is your highest damaging bleed by a lot, especially in AoE, and this just automatically increases all of that by 20%, which does increase all of your damage from your Primal Ras rips, so all of the rips, all the mass AoE rips, this does increase that damage as well. Jumping over to the right hand side, we didn't take Taste for Blood, which means that you're not going to open up the path for Relentless Predator, which is fine because we're not going to take this. And currently, in all the builds I've played, Relentless Predator has not been selected. The energy cost of Ferocious Bite is reduced by 20%, so it's going to save you a little bit of that energy cost when you're pressing it. But the main kicker from it is that like you can for the optimal damage of Ferocious Bite, which if you want to have optimal damage from Ferocious Bite, you're going to do it with 50% energy, or 50 energy, not 50%, but 50 energy, because that allows Ferocious Bite to do up to 100% more damage every time you utilize it, if you have it able to eat up that energy as well. And this will reduce that so that it's at a 20% lower than that 50, so that you can press Ferocious Bite with its maximum damage potential more often. But this is once again, if it does come ahead in single target, it doesn't seem like it will because of where you can allocate your points currently. I would say that this is something that's very up in the air and it's not been tested very thoroughly. But it's in just reading it and application of it, it just doesn't compete with other energy points. Like if you were to choose between Relentless Predator or taking a point in Tireless Energy just would outbeat it 100% of the time, in my opinion. So jumping down on the right hand side here, you have Berserk Frenzy, and this is actually a talent point that is, in my opinion, the one that's up for the most debate when it comes to builds. And because Frenzy is our Frenzy Band legendary we had in the past, it's a little bit of a nerf version from that, not by a ton, but a little bit. But Frenzy Band was very, very strong in the past for us because Frenzy Band, Berserk, and Convoke play very, very strongly with each other because of the amount of abilities and combo point generating abilities that we can get off inside that window of Berserk that will generate a massive bleed across a target or multiple targets because it does do this in AoE as well. However, it is tied to your Berserk, which your Berserk is typically a 3-minute cooldown. If you do spec into Heart of Lion, which we'll talk in a minute, you can get it down to about a minute and a half or so. But this is the one point that you might actually not select inside dungeon because overall, in dungeon specifically, it's only about 3% of your damage because it's only up for the 20-second span of Berserk. while you're using those combo points inside it. And during Berserk, you're typically going into a finisher bite, finisher or finisher shred, finisher shred, finisher shred. So all of the shreds are getting their damage bled across the target. And obviously, if you rake or you brutal slash, that will get bled as well inside Frenzy. But you're only getting it for 20 seconds at a time every time you press Berserk. So its damage is not going to be massively significant over the course of the overall damage. However, this does allow you to get some very big burst with this ability, and obviously tied in with like Convoke. Convoke makes this significantly stronger than it would be to select it without Convoke. So if you're having a Convoke build, you would definitely probably want to try to get Frenzy as much as possible. But there are builds where you play Convoke and not Frenzy, so keep that in mind. This would be the one that's kind of up in the air in my opinion as to which point to sacrifice to get it, because all of the other ones just seem to do overall more damage than Frenzy does. On the right hand side of the tree, this is your choice between Brutal Slash and Wild Slashes, which is your choice between Swipe and Brutal Slash. Brutal Slash has always been our go-to for single target, and it's because Brutal Slash is still only 25 energy versus Shred. Shred is 40 energy to utilize, so Brutal Slash is stronger, as well as it's going to have less energy to utilize it. It is a charge point system, so you have to make sure that you're managing your charges, but overall it is coming ahead. And since they nerf Swipe, even with Swipe being amplified by the Wild Slashes, uh, Brutal Slash still seems to be coming ahead. And Wild Slashes, your Swipe and Thrash damage is increased by 20%. Thrash isn't doing a ton of damage, so if Thrash was doing a little bit more damage, it might be able to offset, and where you would still go with Swipe. Even if Swipe itself is doing less damage, Thrash would just pick up the slack, but it's currently still seeming that Brutal Slash is the play. And who knows? They could try. They could sim it and see that it's not. But currently, Brutal Slash definitely seems like the play currently in Mythic Plus, in single target, in Cleave, so on and so forth. So we're gonna go ahead and take Brutal Slash because that seems like it's pretty much set in stone at this point. We have 3 points to play with, and we still have to come over to the left-hand side of the tree. So jumping over here, this is a Heart of Lion. This is what we were talking about when we talked about Frenzy, and this is each combo point spent reduces the cooldown of Berserk by 0.5 seconds. This is pretty much mandatory, I would say. Like technically, you don't have to get it; you can go around it, but it's going to leave you with a 3-minute cooldown. And 3-minute cooldowns do not play well with anything. It's not good inside raid bosses. It's not good inside Mythic Plus. You want lower cooldowns so that you can use them more frequently to optimize your damage as much as possible. And Berserk gives you that cooldown window with Berserk, so you can have more uptime with it. Uh, so I would say Heart of Lion is your go-to all of the time between your choices if you were to pick the two. Now, I do mention in several of my previous videos that if you were to have like a dungeon, and once you have a set in stone group that consistently runs the same route, and you understand that every 3 minutes is pretty much when you guys are doing a gigantic pull or something, that you might be able to go with just Frenzy and get that extra bleed damage inside that AoE pull instead of going with the reduction from Heart of the Lion. But I would say more often than not, you're still going to go with Heart of the Lion, because as you get up in key level, the packs are just going to take a little bit longer. And if you can have Berserk up every minute and a half or less, then you'll be able to almost have it up pack by pack, right? Or every other pack at minimum. Jumping over here to the right hand side, we have Raging Fury, which finishing moves extend the duration of your Tiger's Fury by zero point 0.4 seconds per combo point spent, which is very, very strong in my opinion. Tiger's Fury is your main, once again, your main amplifying ability for all of your bleeds. They last through the entire duration of them, even if Tiger Fury falls off. However, Raging Fury just allows that to extend even further, and if we do amplify this later on with Carnivorous Instincts, with vast majority of the builds do, then you're going to be increasing all of your abilities by 27%, and this allows you to maintain that for as long as possible. Now, it's a switch talent, so on the other side, we have Tiger's Tenacity. Tiger's Fury causes your next 3 finishing moves to restore 1 combo point. Inside Mythic Plus, you have targets dying all of the time, so every single time you get a Tiger's Fury reset, you can press it, and that way you have a continuous flow of getting 1 free combo point every single time you use a finisher, which is very, very good, especially when you lack crit. or if you just want to be two GCDs and finisher, two GCDs and a finisher, which definitely comes off as very strong. Do I think that it's going to outplay Raging Fury? I don't. Typically, in all my builds, I'm playing Raging Fury because I like to maintain that damage buff consistently. However, you have to take into consideration that like Tiger's Tenacity does have a chance of being overridden or just completely useless in certain scenarios, mainly like in your Berserk window. You're going to get a refund from the finisher you just did, which is going to give you 2 combo points. You're going to shred, which gives you 3 combo points. And if you have Tiger Tenacity in that mix somewhere, it's just not, there's no value to it because you're going to shred anyway, which means you lose all value from Tiger's Tenacity within your Berserk windows, or any time that you're like critting massively, then you're just not going to get the full value out of it. If you are able inside, outside of your Berserk window though, to get Tiger's Tenacity and then get 2 crits that are just giving you 2 combo points each, then you're going to get 5 combo points, whereas before you get 4, so you'd be able to hit a finisher that much faster. Overall, I would say Raging Fury is still my go-to though. Now here is where we have a little bit of an option. Whether we go down the middle of the tree to get the Convoke build, which is the only reason why you would go down the middle of the tree is to get the Convoke build, or if you're going to spec into one of the other amplifiers at the top of the tree to open up the bottom bracket to not play Convoke. And there are 2 different builds I would recommend between those two. However, for now, we're going to talk about the Convoke one. So when we go to the Convoke, you're going to spec into Survival Instincts. Survival Instincts is very, very strong. Not There are not a lot of DPS in general that have just a 50% DR as a defensive that they can use whenever they want. It is on a 3-minute cooldown, but typically you're not going to be taking damage in that kind of way where you need to have a 50% DR all of the time. There are several very deadly abilities inside Dragonflight and inside Dungeon specifically, as well as in Raid, where this can come very strong. So having it is better than not having it in a lot of scenarios. But if you do not play the Convoke build, you won't go down the center, which means you won't spend the point in Survival Instincts. But we are going to, so we're going to take the point in Survival Instincts. We jump down here, you have Frantic Momentum, which is finishing moves have a 3% chance per combo point spent to grant you 10% haste. This stacks up twice, and the only thing that stacks up though is the percent chance, which goes to 6 per combo point, which gives you a 30% chance every time you use a finisher to gain 10% haste for 6 seconds. I really wish that they would increase the duration of the haste, because the proc chance doesn't seem like it's strong enough to keep it up the majority of the time. And for only 6 seconds, that's not a lot of time to amplify what you want to amplify, which is going to be your dot ticks, as much as possible. Currently, it's giving you a little bit of that energy regeneration with increasing your haste, but I wish it was a little bit longer, or that the chance rate was just significantly higher than just 30%. Um, but in order to get down this side of the tree, we are going to take Frantic Momentum. On the left and right hand side, let's go over those 2-point nodes. All 3 of these right here in the center are all 2-point nodes. On the left hand side, you have Carnivorous Instincts, which we've talked about a couple times now, which is Tiger's Fury's damage bonuses increased by 6%. This goes up to 12%, which then makes your Tiger's Fury do 27% increased damage every time you press it. And then that obviously coupled in with Raging Fury allows it to stay up a massive amount of the time. And that's the name of the game, is try to keep it up as much as humanly possible, as well as making sure you get all of your bleeds in before this is going to fall off. That way, as you're generating through your combo point generating abilities that don't snapshot that damage across targets, then your Tiger's Fury will be back up by the time you need it again. And if you have Raging Fury, it does. If you take Tiger's Tenacity, there's a lot of times where it won't, and you're relying on Predator procs in order to keep Tiger's Fury up as much as humanly possible. But I would say Carnivorous Instincts is very, very strong. Now, it does combat with certain other abilities that we'll talk to in just a moment. Jumping over here to Cat's Curiosity, clear casted abilities generate 25% of their energy cost. This ability, I would say, is very strong for energy regeneration compared to Frantic Momentum if you have Moment of Clarity talented. If you have Cat's Curiosity, Moment of Clarity, and Omen of Clarity, that is a very strong synergy that I've talked about in the past that gives you a ton of energy because you're generating so many of the Omen of Clarity procs, and then Shred and Thrash are both 40 energy each. And so those are going to refund you 50% of that energy cost. So it's going to give you 20 energy for all those 40 energy abilities, which is going to be Shred and Thrash, and then 25% or 50% of your 25%, so your 12.5, um, energy for your brutal slashes. So you would generally get more energy out of using those two abilities over brutal slash, but brutal slash with moment of clarity is going to do more damage because it has higher damage and 15% of higher damage through the damage you gain through moment of clarity is better used on brutal slash. Um, but I would only take Cat's Curiosity if you were taking Moment of Clarity. And currently, we're not taking Moment of Clarity because we took Sudden Ambush because the damage is just better, as well as it's 2 points that you're sacrificing on this side of the tree. Now, we are talking about an AoE build here first, which is what we're generating. So on the right-hand side of the tree, we're going to go down here, and the reason why is because we need to get to Apex Predators. There is no AoE build that you play that does not run this ability. It is way too strong to pass by. So we have to get to it. In order to get to it, we have a switch talent here. We have Vein Ripper, which Rip, Rake, Thrash lasts 25% longer. They did fix this one more so recently where Primal Wrath rips do get affected by Vein Ripper now. Before it didn't. However, I don't believe that you're going to play Vein Ripper because you don't need your bleeds to do your rotation. You don't need them to be that much longer. You're already reducing them by 25% with Circle and Life and Death, which is mandatory, and we'll talk about that in a second. And this just counteracts that, so you'll have if you take Circle Life and Death, you'll just have your bleeds pretty much at the same amount of time that they are baseline. Before that, they'll just be ticking significantly faster. However, that's competing with Rip and Tear. Applying Rip to a target also applies Tear that deals 12% of the new Rip's damage over 6 seconds. So every time you rip a target, it's just giving you an echo of that rip. And when you Primal Wrath, this is going to AoE rip across all of your targets, and every time you do that, you're going to have an echo rip on that target as well, which is just going to increase your damage bleeds across all of those targets, which is just the net gain, in my opinion. I would 100% play this in AoE, especially over Vein Ripper, because you're getting more damage out of it, and you just don't need that extra time to facilitate your rotation. So we're going to take Rip and Tear, and then we're going to come down here and get Apex Predators, which rips damage, has a 4% chance to make your next Ferocious Bite free and deal maximum damage. And this is where the build kind of starts coming together because now that you have Apex Predator, you're going to be mass AoEing your rip across everything. Every single time your rip on all of your targets ticks and does damage, each one of those has a 4% chance to proc you a free Ferocious Bite at max damage. Then you're going to bite, which is then going to give you your Sabertooth buff, increasing all of those rips damage that just proc that free Ferocious Bite. It's going to make all of those rips do 25% more damage, as well as Rampant Ferocity is going to AoE 25% of that free Ferocious Bite at maximum damage that you got across all of your targets, giving you a little chunk of burst, as well as amping up that bleed that's already ticking across all of your targets, which is very synergistic with how our entire spec works and very strong in AoE. And the name of the game in this one, in my opinion, is make sure you're not wasting any procs. You want to make sure that you're utilizing your Apex Predator carving procs as much as possible, but you also want to maintain your uptime on Sabertooth as much as possible because it's only 4 seconds. So you want to make sure that you press this and that you're every 4 seconds, especially if you get additional procs, that you're trying to maintain your Sabertooth dot because your rip inside mass AoE is going to do more damage by far than that one free Apex Predator is going to do. But you also, once again, don't want to waste it. So you want to be using these as close together as possible, but not overlapping your Sabertooth buff. And then we jump over here. We want to get to our Circle Life and Death, which is our next priority, because that is the most, I would say, mandatory ability out of anything on this tree. And so you're going to take Soul of the Forest, which Soul of the Forest is a little bit nerfed down from its previous days in Shadowlands and prior, where your finishing moves grant 3 energy per combo point spent and deal 5% increased damage. So you're getting a 5% net gain for Ferocious Bite and Primal Wrath and Rip. However, you're also getting a little bit of energy refunded back to you, which is great. You know, we need more energy, especially in most of these builds. You're going to need a little bit more energy to make things feel a little more fluid. So we're going to take Soul of the Forest, and then you're going to take Circle and Life and Death. Circle and Life and Death, your damage over time effects deal their damage in 25% less time, and your healing over time effects in 15% less time. So obviously the damage over time is where we're getting that 9-second Primal Wrath. If you look over here for Rip, you're getting 18-second Rip. and so on and so forth. It's going to reduce all of that to just make it do its damage way faster, which makes our spec very, very high paced. Circle Life and Death is also over your periodic effects, your damage over time effects, so it does apply to Lunar Inspiration and your Moonfire as well as your Sunfire because it does all of your periodic damage. Now we talked about this AoE build and we talked about going down the center for Convoke, so we're going to take Convoke. And Convoke is, this initial one is going to be your 2-minute Convoke, the old style before you had the legendary. So it's going to do 16 Druid spells and abilities over 4 seconds. And this is where it kind of comes down to a lot of options because you could spec into a 1-minute Convoke depending on the talents you pick. But in most of the builds I've played, you're just going to leave it at the 2-minute Convoke because you need that point elsewhere. Before we jump off of this switch talent, you do have Incarnation as an option. Incarnation is competing with Convoke, and all Incarnation does is give you 10 more seconds of your Berserk window. That's literally all it does, which is an opportunity to have obviously a longer duration of going into a shred bite, or shred primal wrath, shred primal wrath, and so on, because you have 10 extra seconds to do that. However, you don't typically have the energy to do that. To last that long throughout it, as well as if you're going to take this, you would pair it up with the frenzy aspect of Berserk over here, because then you're going to have an extra 10 seconds to get even more bleeds out. Um, but ultimately, it just doesn't compete in my eyes with Convoke. I have tested it out. I have tried to play with it. It's not horrible on damage. It's not horrible single target damage either. But if you're looking for burst, if you're looking for uptime on your Raging Fury by getting more finishers out, then Convoke is just going to play better and be more synergistic with getting more finishers out very, very quickly, as well as getting more bleeds and dots out across an AoE pack, which is all going to be affected by your Circle of Life and Death. So all of the rakes it puts out, all of the Moonfire it puts out, is all going to be increased in damage because of Circle of Life and Death, which just makes it significantly better, as well as all of your bites are going to not only give you your Sabertooth buff and have 15% increased damage, but they are also going to splash that AoE by doing 25% of their damage across the target. So Convoke did get a little bit of a buff in that sense in AoE. However, something that is worth noting is that Convoke did get nerfed from its previous iterations, where Ferocious Bite casted inside Convoke won't cast at a 5 combo point finisher anymore. It only casts at a 4 combo point finisher, as well as you cannot generate Tiger's Fury inside Convoke. You will want to have Tiger's Fury active before you Convoke, so that all 16 of those spells are amplified by that 27% damage or that 15% damage, depending on if you go into Carnivorous Instincts or not. Looking down at this bottom talent, Ashmane's Guidance, is if you take Incarnation, you would get the passive, your melee attacks have a chance to activate Incarnation Avatar of Ashmane for 6 seconds without the ability to enter stealth in combat. So it's only going to give you 6 seconds worth of Incarnation, and if you don't have Frenzy procced, it's super not noticeable is my problem, and it's only 6 seconds. So you're only getting a handful of GCDs in, because you're not getting 6 GCDs in. It's very unlikely you're going to get maybe 5 if you proc it the moment it is and you have the energy to do them all. More than likely, you'll probably sit around 4 or 3 inside that 6-second window. And you're just not gaining a ton of value. Even if you had Frenzy and it was adding an additional bleed, you're not gaining a ton of value from it, because Incarnation is just giving you little hits of Berserk every once in a while. It's too random to be of massive use, and then the overall gain from it just isn't super noticeable. And then you have Convoke. If you select Convoke at the previous switch talent, Convoke the Spirit's cooldown is reduced by 50%, and its duration and number of spells cast is reduced by 25%. Convoke the Spirit has a increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability. So our exceptional spell and ability was Feral Frenzy. So if you take the 1-minute Convoke, you can just proc your Feral Frenzy, which is a talent that's here at the bottom of the tree as well, which we'll talk about in just a second. But it does give you that 1-minute Convoke back. And in purely single target builds, there is a argument to have your 1-minute Convoke back, and we've obviously seen how strong 1-minute Convoke was in the past because it was our best talent profile to have 1-minute Convoke, which is great to have. So we'll have to see if that is the gameplay here, and I will show builds later on that do, for single target purposes, go into the 1-minute Convoke in Dungeons, especially higher end dungeons, 15 pluses, I would say going with the 2-minute convoke and not the 1-minute convoke is where it's at. Jumping over here to the left hand side, we have adaptive swarm, and this is one of the talents, one of the main talents, I would say, um, that my mind has changed on. Initially, from playing with obviously adaptive swarm inside Shadowlands, it wasn't my favorite ability. I like the fact that you're amplifying your bleeds and that it tried to push for kind of a bleed build inside Shadowlands, even though our damage profile was obviously altered to more direct damage with Ferocious Bite back then. But it's not anymore. So we are very much a bleed build now again. And Adaptive Swarm, even though it has some issues with it, in my opinion, it does increase all of your periodic damage by 25%. And since you have Circle and Life and Death and Adaptive Swarm now, you have a little bit more uptime than you previously did with the utilization of Adaptive Swarm. And that's because every single time it leaps, instead of it being 12 seconds every time it leaps, it's 9 seconds. So you'll apply it once you have all your bleeds on a target, you apply this, you get 25% increased damage from all of your periodic effects on the target, which here you're going to have Moonfire, you have Sunfire, you have Rake, you have Thrash, you have your Rip. You can have, if you take Feral Frenzy, that counts as a bleed as well. You also have your Rip and Tear bleeds. So all of that's going to be affected by increased 25% damage because all of those are periodic effects on your target. So it's very strong by amping up all of those, as well as it's doing its own dot of shadow damage over 9 seconds. And then after 9 seconds, it's going to leap to a friendly target and heal that friendly target for 9 seconds. Then it's going to leap back to your damaging target, and it's going to once again amplify that damage. However, at this point, since it is 9 seconds instead of 12 seconds, you're going to get it back on the target before adaptive swarm comes off of cooldown. However, before it finishes its 9 seconds reapplication the second time it's on your enemy target, your adaptive swarm will come back off cooldown so that the moment that it gets down to where it's 1 second on your enemy, you can press adaptive swarm again, and then you're going to have a 9 second on, and then 9 second off, and then 18 seconds on, and then 9 seconds off, and rinse and repeat that system. So you get a little bit more of a longer duration window than you would previously without having Circle and Life and Death with Adaptive Swarm. In the past, it was actually bad synergy to have Adaptive Swarm and Circle and Life and Death because you wanted Adaptive Swarm to stay on the target as much as humanly possible, and reducing that kind of hurt you. However, in the long run, especially for single target, being able to have it up on a target for 18 seconds at a time instead of just the 12 kind of breaks even in total across the board as long as you are looking into that and it is going back on your enemy target, which it has a chance to not if for whatever reason the friendly target goes on like runs away, runs out of range of the target, so on and so forth. However, it's not just adaptive swarm that they've given us. They gave us the legendary application of adaptive swarm from the Necrolords as well, which is called Unbridled Swarm. Adaptive swarm has a 60% chance to split into two swarms each time it jumps. And this right here inside Mythic Plus, because you're playing with so many dots, is very strong. You do have the ability to keep this up very, very consistently across your party members. That way, every time you go into a pack, it's able to leap. Now, the problem with it would come down to timing because there are times where you'll go into a pack and your adaptive form just leaped onto the party and you're entering a pack, meaning for 9 seconds you're not going to have any increased damage across those targets. And if they're very low HP targets, then you're not going to get too much value out of adaptive swarm from them in the first place, but you're not going to get any of it if they just die, right? Especially if you play with Windwalker monks currently who can just touch a death pretty much all the small ads in a group. So you have to be mindful of that. And it's just about maintaining the uptime on making sure that you're getting these out as much as humanly possible so that you can keep them just jumping. And if you can get it to where you have your entire swarm leaping from your party and leaping onto enemies, and every time it leaps from all 5 of your party members in Mythic Plus onto your enemy targets, you have the chance of it duplicating all of those times. So you could duplicate it up to 10 times. Um, from that initial leap from your party, because every time it leaps, it has a chance to split. And so you could split it on the 10 targets if you were to pull 10 targets. And if you did that, one, you just won the lottery with it. But two, you're also going to be able to do a ton of damage with your Primal Wrath and Mass AoE dots across all of those targets, which definitely has the potential to be very, very strong. As well as it does have healing utility, because every single time it's on your party members, it is healing them, giving you a little bit more of that hybrid spec utilization where you're healing the party as well as damaging everything. So Unbridled Swarm and Adaptive Swarm are very strong. I would say that the competition is typically between if you're going to take Carnivorous Instincts or you're going to take Adaptive Swarm. And the reason why is because here you have 12% damage, right? All of the time, though. Now, if you look at Adaptive Swarm, you're typically going to have a 50% uptime if you're trying to play it perfectly. And the easiest way to make this make sense is if you say it has 50% uptime. So if it always has 50% uptime and it does 25% increased damage, that means it's doing 12.5% increased damage over the course of the entire thing, right? Because half the time it's doing none, half the time it's doing 25. Even it out, you're doing 12.5. Um, and so you're doing 12.5 over the course of the entire instance, and this one's just doing 12% over the entire instance. So there's that zero point 0.5 difference. However, Tiger's Fury doesn't only affect your periodic abilities, it also affects all of your combo point generating abilities, your Brutal Slash, your Shreds, your Swipe if you were to take it. It's going to amplify all of that damage, as well as it's going to amplify the initial damage of things. Thrash does have initial damage application, Primal Wrath has initial damage application. It's going to amplify all of that damage as well as give you 12% damage over the increased damage over the course. And that is decently significant, especially I would say if you're trying to burst things down, if they're not living for very long, that Carnivorous Instincts would be the play. So most, especially in lower keys, I would say Carnivorous Instincts is definitely stronger. Even in some dungeons at higher keys, I think Carnivorous Instincts is going to be the play over Adaptive Swarm, just because it's giving you all of that damage on demand whenever you want it, because it just exists all the time, right? Versus Adaptive Swarm has the potential to be very strong and increase all of your periodic effects, which does increase your damage significantly when it is on those targets. But it is off and on throughout the dungeon. Its timing can be messed up. But it also does do direct shadow damage as well, which isn't super, super strong, but it definitely does add to the value of Adaptive Swarm. And the dot does have value over Carnivorous Instincts, but once again, Carnivorous Instincts is going to do all of your damage and not just your periodics. Jumping down here to the left hand side, this is the choice that you have to make, whether you want to complicate your rotation a little bit more, or you just want to go with the nice, simple, and easy mode, right? And that's going to be your choice between Lion Strength and Blood Talons. And Lion Strength is your Ferocious Bites and Rip deal 15% increased damage all of the time. So every time your Apex Predator procs a free Ferocious Bite, it will do 15% increased damage. And then all of your Primal Wraths all of the time will do 15% increased damage. And that's phenomenal. It's very good. I wish this talent was just a little bit stronger so you could actually play it over Blood Talons. And I understand why they didn't, because you have an easy mode and then you have a mode that's going to do slightly more damage, but going to require you to engage with your rotation more inside every pack and every scenario. So we have Blood Talons. Blood Talons still use the same way as it was inside Shadowlands. When you use 3 different combo point generating abilities within 4 seconds of each other, the damage of your next 2 rips or Ferocious Bites is increased by 25%. They did nerf this by 5%. It used to be 30. I kind of wish they go back to 30%, which would give it just 50% more value than Lion Strength, especially if you were to mess it up in some kind of way. And having Blood Talons uptime on your bleeds, the actual application of it, is very hard to track to see how much you're gaining from it, because there are times where you're going to override a Blood Talon bleed if you're spamming out damage, or that it's just going to get eaten up by a Convoke, or you're going to utilize it to get Sabretooth up and it's going to eat out that bleed or that proc of Blood Talons, so on and so forth. So you have to make sure you monitor it. However, inside this current build that we have on the screen, you do have Lunar Inspiration, which we talked about. It makes it easier to generate it because you have Lunar Inspiration, you have Shred, Brutal Slash, and Thrash that you can utilize to generate Blood Talons. Um, so you can keep it up relatively simply by making sure that you just swap around to targets that don't have those applications of those bleeds, so you can make sure that you're multi-dotting while maintaining your Blood Talons uptime, and that you're trying to get that consistently every single 5 combo point generators you're doing. And the reason why you want to do it every 5 combo points instead of just utilizing the full 2 applications of Blood Talons is because you don't know when your Apex is going to proc your free bites. And when your free bites come out, you do want to have Blood Talons on them as much as possible. So if every single 5 combo point generator you're doing, you're generating a new and refreshing your Blood Talons every single time, you're going to up the chances that you will not lose out on having Blood Talons applied to your finishers. It will happen though, where you will have finishers that you do not have Blood Talons for. You will have times where you proc more Ferocious Bites than you do have finishers, and you will have times where you end up using your Blood Talons before you reapply your Primal Wrath with a Blood Talons on top of it. Blood Talons, Wrath, and Rips are going to be your main priority to try to maintain because it's going to do your most damage across mass AoE, but your Ferocious Bite is going to amplify that with an additional 25% increased damage across all of those bleeds again, giving you 50% increased damage across all of that. And then obviously you're adding on Tiger's Fury, increased damage amps, and so on. But it is a little bit more complicated to play. It does take a little time getting used to, and if you're not used to trying to generate Blood Talons and rotate your which dots you're going to reapply within the 3 different combo point generating abilities every 5 combo points because you're going to rotate them, then using Lion Strength is just a safer option than it is to go to Blood Talons. But for the sake of damage, take Blood Talons. For the sake of convenience and ease, and especially if you're learning the spec, go with Lion Strength. Jumping down here to the very last talent that we haven't talked about is going to be Feral Frenzy. We've had Feral Frenzy for a pretty decent amount of time now. Feral Frenzy gives you a good burst of damage. It also gives you 5 combo points when you press it. The 5 combo points build up when you press it, but they build up very, very quickly. But just make sure you take that in consideration when you press the ability, because if you press it and then immediately press a finisher or something, it's not going to be 5 combo points. You do have to generate them over the course of your attack that you furiously frenzy clawing your target 5 times. So you're going to claw it 5 times and generate 5 combo points, as well as you're going to put a bleed on the target. It's still a 45-second cooldown, which is my main issue with it. The 5 combo points does play nicely into not only single target, where you can Feral Frenzy and get up to a 5 combo point very, very quickly, but also in AoE because of the fact that, once again, it gets you there to another Primal Wrath very, very quickly. Would I say that it's something that we're going to select often? Not if you're taking Convoke. If you're taking Convoke, you probably won't see play with Feral Frenzy very much at all. Convoke is just a stronger version of this with 15 more seconds for the 1 minute Convoke anyway. For the 2 minute Convoke, obviously you could have gotten 2 of these Feral Frenzies out. However, I still think that Convoke itself, even on the 2 minute, is going to be stronger than double Frenzies would. You know, because of how many bites you're going to get out, that 2 bites is just going to negate all of the damage that Feral Frenzy can do, even the 2 applications of it, and you can get several bites out of Convoke, especially the 2 minute Convoke. You get quite a few of them. All right, so now we have gone over all of the talents, and I know it took a long time, so if you stayed this long inside the video, thank you guys very much. Now I want to go into the different builds that you can play. So this was an AoE build. However, there's several variations to the AoE build that I want to go into. We talked about a few of the little variations going out. Now I just want to display them so that you guys can see. So this one right here, I would say, is more of a direct damage. You need to kill things decently fast. And that's why you're going with Carnivorous Instincts over Adaptive Swarm, as well as you're going to have some pretty good single target because you're going with Convoke, which is going to give you that good burst at the beginning of a fight, as well as you're going with the reduced CDR for Heart of the Lion, but you're having Lunar Inspiration, and then on the Druid side of the tree, you're taking Nurturing Instincts and Heart of the Wild, which is mainly going to amplify that single target damage because you're only going to Heart of the Wild when you're doing boss fights because it is a 5 minute cooldown and you want to just amplify as much as you can single target because our AoE is sitting very, very nicely. And it's a single target that you want to try to amplify with Heart of the Wild being 5 minutes. As well as it's 5 minutes, you know, you're only going to bosses are going to be more than likely the only thing that's 5 minutes apart that's worthwhile to use it on, unless you need it for utility purposes. However, we were talking about going into adaptive swarm. So if you were to just lose out on carnivorous instinct, you can go down here. This does give you a little more healing, and it does give you some very good dot damage increases. I would say that this is going to be for high end keys where targets are living for a significant amount of time, where you can gain the full value out of this, is when I would play it. However, if you have a group that's super bursty, like you're running a demon hunter and a windwalker monk that is playing with feral as well, then you might want to just stay with carnivorous instincts and not not worry yourself too much. There is a build also, if you want to try to jump into a little bit more single target inside AoE, that you could go into one carnivorous and one adaptive swarm. This will give you that application of having increased effectiveness on your one boss target, as well as getting a 6% increased damage amp, which is very strong and definitely a viable option. So it's just changing these little bit of talents here that's going to drastically change some of your damage profiles, I would say, in a single target environment. One of the other builds that you can do is that if you didn't want to just go purely single target and you wanted to go for more of that burst, but you feel like you're running out of energy all the time, then you would take out Lunar Inspiration and you go into Tireless Energy. And then you would play into the rest of the spec just like we did previously, just like this. And tireless energy at the loss of lunar inspiration, you do a little bit less single target damage. Lunar inspiration is good for blood talents, however, it is not your priority at all in AOE because what you want to do before you lunar inspiration anything is you're going to want to make sure that all of your targets have your rake across them. So if you're able to switch to targets that don't have rake and use that as your combo point generating ability and just use thrash and Brutal Slash as your other two to generate your blood talents, that's exactly what you're going to want to do, especially if you have your charges of Brutal Slash. As well as on that topic, you don't want to use all your Brutal Slash charges one after another. You want to weave those in with your other abilities, especially if you're taking blood talents. If you don't take blood talents, it's not as essential to do it, and you could blow them all at the beginning if you were taking lion strength instead. However, with blood talents, it's very essential that you're weaving in these and not just spamming out one ability, especially since Brutal Slash has charges. But this is going to give you a significant energy improvement with using tireless energy instead of using Moonfire. However, in this build is the build that I would also not take Nurturing Instincts or Heart of the Wild because you don't have that initial damage that you would gain from just magical damage. So that's when you can trade in, go to Nature's Vigil. You could also take out all of the Nurturing Instincts and jump over and take some defensiveness instead and go with a build much like this. And that will give you a 6% DR as well as an additional heal instead and allow you to have decent damage profile on this side. The only reason I would say, once again, take any of the magic amplification over here is if you're going to run Lunar Inspiration, which Lunar Inspiration is a strong ability and it does make Blood Talent significantly easier. I don't think I can iterate that too much more because I've said it several times over the course of this video, but I definitely think it's worthwhile to mention. Now, one of the things I have played with a little bit, uh, more so recently, in the past 2 weekends, is taking Merciless Claws off and going after a different damage amping ability. And the damage amping ability is a choice between Moment of Clarity and Berserk's Frenzy. And ultimately, what it comes down to is I would say this is a dungeon specific an affix specific choice in Mythic Plus specifically. Because of the fact that if it's a tyrannical one, you're going to want that single target damage, so you would take Merciless Claws. However, if it's not and it's fortified, then you might opt into doing more AoE damage or just having, a different damage profile than just single target, which Moment of Clarity does give you more energy regeneration, but it's also increasing Brutal Slash and Thrash's damage, which are your AoE abilities. And then having Frenzy is not only going to actually increase your single target burst, which those bosses aren't going to last as long. So being able to burst and do a lot of upfront damage will just reduce the overall time of that boss fight. But also, Frenzy is very strong in AoE, especially in mass AoE. So with this, I'm thinking of dungeons like Algathar's Academy, where you have like the tree boss that has a massive amount of AoE, especially the trash before that has a massive amount of AoE that you can use this on and gain a ton of value and a ton of damage from applying additional bleeds across them. So sacrificing Merciless Claws to get that massive amount of additional AoE, especially over the course of that dungeon. There's several very large AoE pulls that you can do. That Frenzy I think would be more valuable than Merciless Claws would be. So if you were to spec into it, you just spec in the same for the bottom half of this tree that you would have, placing in all 10 points as this. And it just, you would lose out on Merciless Claws and Lunar Inspiration. And this build is bursty. It's a lot of upfront damage, and like I said, this is would be more so for a fortified key where you're doing a lot of ad damage, a lot of group trash damage, and then you're doing burst on boss. So fortified big trash is what this build is for, in my opinion, is what I would go with. You shouldn't feel too energy starved because you do have the tireless energy point here. And in this scenario, you kind of would want to like try, if you could, take tireless energy out and put it in a moment of clarity. But if we were to take this point away, all of our points down would obviously reset. You have to have a certain amount of points up here, so you can't sacrifice that um, to go and place your points away. You could take tireless energy and put it in Merciless Claws, and then do that exact same build that we just did. So let's go ahead and jump into there, put the 1 point over here, go down here, get this. Shoo. You could go into that if you didn't want to have that energy regeneration. But you are going to get into a point where you're not generating blood talons as well as you want because you're running out of energy to be able to press that third ability consistently. Because two of your abilities are costing 40 energy, one of them costs 25 energy, and you don't have any additional abilities inside this rotation. So you're going to want to have some form of energy inside this build. And if you're trying to get that through haste as a stat, you can try to do that. However, I think the 1 point reduction here to have a little bit less single target and even less of amount of AoE through Brutal Slash is a worthy point to take to go into Tireless Energy and, go about the build in that order. All right. And ultimately, that's the AoE builds that I've been playing with. And that have I've been having decent success with. Um, I've talked about in previous videos that going with the most abilities is probably going to give you the most bang for your buck because it makes blood talons easier to generate, as well as you have more things that you get to do. You're never sitting there lacking an ability to press. You're Not everything is always going to have all of your abilities, especially if you're running with Moonfire, and Moonfire is going to increase your single target damage, which having a profile that's good in single target as well as doing very good in AOE is what you want inside a Mythic Plus setting, and we can adapt accordingly. So that's one of the great things about Feral is we can adapt to that single target scenario where you can forego your points to have a little bit more single target, even inside this build where you have burst and a little bit more single target, while just losing out on some of your 6% of your overall AoE potentially damage, um, and you can swap it around. And that's the great thing is that I don't think there's going to be one completely perfect dungeon um, PVE encounter spec, but obviously Sims will come out to the purely best single target, and then after that it will kind of depend on how long ads live, your group comp, who's killing what, how fast the target's dying, so on and so forth. Now this was all AoE, and initially when I made this video, I was talking about single target and single target specifically, and that's what I want to dive in here is jump into that. We've talked about all the talents, we've talked about the AoE that has been tested thoroughly. Now let's talk in a little bit of speculation because a lot of raid testing has been done over the course of changes that have been made to specs in general, and there's a lot less concrete information on just pure single target damage across the internet than there is AoE because we're able to test AoE. We're able to test it in Mythic Plus as I speak currently. But single target, pure single target on like raid boss fights and stuff like that, not very much. Currently in Vault of the Incarnates, I think there's only one boss that's purely single target, Patchwork style, that's Teros, and everything else has some kind of equivalent of ads, or it's just purely like, is just AoE, which those AoE bosses, you will just pick one of the uh, builds that we just went over. However, for purely single target, I want to show you guys what I would pick off a single target based off of the information and testing these talents out and what I think is going to amount to the best single target. And that's going to be initially getting rid of Double Clawed Rake, getting rid of Primal Wrath. Um, then we're going to come over here. We're going to get Merciless Claws. You're going to get your Lunar Inspiration. You're going to keep all of these abilities up here. So you're going to have Sabretooth. You're not going to take Rampant Ferocity because it gives you absolutely no gain in Pierce Single Target. You're going to get 2 points in Sudden Ambush because Sudden Ambush is going to be more valuable now, and the single target point is going to be better because instead of splitting the 2 points, because we were already putting 1 point in Sudden Ambush, once again, Rampant Ferocity gives no value. So we're going to go into Berserk. This is the same thing. Tear Open Wounds gives no value if you do not take Primal Wrath, but Taste for Blood does. So we're going to put 2 points in here. We are eating a little bit more points up towards the upper half of the tree at this point because of what we've selected, but it's worthwhile because of the increased damage. This is Tasteful Blood is going to increase the damage of your Ferocious Bite by a decent portion, and then you're going to have Sudden Ambush up a significant portion of the time as well. You're going to take Infected Wounds because it's one of your highest damaging bleeds, and it's just a net 30% increase. This is obviously mandatory for Dreadful Bleeding, which is your rip increase damage. Uh, then you're going to jump over here. You're going to take Predatory Swiftness. You're going to take your Berserk's Reduction, Raging Fury still. And then there's going to be two different builds we can go here, but we're going to go over the Convoke build first, just like we did prior. So you're going to put your 1 point in here. You have 1 point to spend, which is going to be taking that Brutal Slash, coming down and getting your Frantic Momentum into your Convoke. Got to absolutely mandatory to take Circle Life and Death. And then over here on the left-hand side, you're going to take Blood Talons, absolutely mandatory single target, and then you're going to take your 2 points into Carnivorous Instincts. You have your 1 point into Adaptive Swarm, and then this last point is where you can play with. Um, Ultimately, the best option in my opinion, and the single target build I'm going to probably be playing is going to be the 1 minute Convoke because you're getting 1 minute Convoke, Circle Knife and Death, Adaptive Swarm, Carnivorous Instincts, Blood Talons. You're getting the entire shebang here, which is very, very, very strong. Now, if a boss fight were to be super, super quick, I'd probably forego the 1 point in Carnivorous Instincts and go with your Frenzy over here on the side. However, that's not going to be the case, especially at the beginning. Once you start getting to the point where you're trying to super parse and the boss fights are trucking down in time frames, I think that it would be viable to trade that off. However, currently, I think that you're going to not go with Frenzy and go with Carnivorous Instincts at the beginning of Dragonflight. 1 minute Convoke does have the chance to use Feral Frenzy, so if you're taking Feral Frenzy with it, you're already getting that ability more often than not. I would say you're going to get that ability to proc with your 1 minute Convokes. Obviously, not as often as you would if you just had the ability, but I would say about half of the amount of times that if you just selected Feral Frenzy, you would get that just passively through your 1 minute Convoke, which is, my opinion, is why you wouldn't take it to double up on it. Also, on the right hand side here, Rip and Tear, you're just not going to be applying Rip as often as you would inside single target as you would inside AoE. You're still going to reapply it because Sabretooth doesn't make your Rip just last on the target forever now. However, it's only 12% of that Rip's damage. You're not trying to optimize that Rip's damage as much as you were previously because now you are just going to bite a lot. But when you're biting a lot, your Rip is going to get its increased damage from Sabretooth a little bit more frequently than it would inside AoE, unless you're in mass AoE where you're just getting proc after proc of Apex. But ultimately, this is what I think that we were going to play. On the left-hand side of the tree, I think that you are going to spec into your Heart of the Wild, and you're going to spec into your Nurturing Instincts. I guess I should have done Nurturing Instincts first, but you're going to spec into... I would say you're probably going to spec into something like this because Innervate's going to be very, very strong in Raid, like we talked about previously. And Nurturing Instincts, as well as Heart of the Wild, is going to increase your Moonfire damage inside that pure single target scenario. And then you're going to have Adaptive Swarm increasing all of your periodic abilities, Carnivorous Instincts increasing all of it as well. So this is the build I would say is going to be my main one going into Dragonflight off the get-go, because I think it's going to be the strongest overall if you can play it correctly. Now, there is another single target build that I do want to mention, and that's not taking this center row. And if you do not take this center row, what you end up doing is you end up taking your Moment of Clarity. Everything up here is going to stay the same. You're going to take all of these abilities just like you would, because pretty much mandatory. Um, but what you're going to do is you're going to take Moment of Clarity because that's going to open up your next bracket. You're going to take your Feral Frenzy, jump down here, get Cast Curiosity. You're going to take your Soul of the Forest, Circle Life and Death, Carnivorous Instincts. You're going to take Blood Talons, Adaptive Swarm, and this is where you would take a Feral Frenzy. Um, in this build, you're losing obviously your Convoke, your big defensive, and your frantic momentum, so a little bit of the haste. But I would say that the haste that you gain from having or the not haste, but energy you gain from Moment of Clarity and Curiosity pretty much negates this one. This one didn't give you any kind of benefit outside of obviously defensiveness. So as far as energy regeneration and damage, there was no benefit there. Um, and then, like I said, you're going to have that with the 1 minute Convoke, you will have Feral Frenzies, but now you have it every 45 seconds to give you a little bit more damage, as well as Moment of Clarity is giving you just a tad more damage as well with that 15%. But this is a build you can definitely play as well for single target. I just personally think that having the 1 minute Convoke outbeats having the 15% and your Feral Frenzy. The only thing is if it came down to energy is ultimately what this one would come at. This is going to be more energy efficient than your Convoke build will be, but your Convoke build will have more burst as well as some defensive. And that's why I would go with that build over this current one on the screen. But it was worth mentioning because there was times where we were just completely playing without Convoke and we thought that Convoke just wasn't going to be something that we really played or that had the potential of not being played. Um, so to jump out of that and go back into this build, we're going to lose these and then come down here and lose that one. Whoa. Boom. And that is what I would play for single target. Obviously, this is pure single target. This isn't adding in add cleave or anything like that. The moment that you start adding adds into the mix is when you have to start deciding how much value is it to go off of this beaten path and start jumping into Primal Wrath, right? Primal Wrath is definitely going to be your strongest first point to take, and then Double Claw Rage will come down to how long are those ads lasting. So the spider boss in Vault Incarnates is a good example of this. Is you have a whole bunch of these little spiders that are going to spawn all over the place that are going to chase people around. Is it worth it, in my opinion, to take Primal Wrath to try to damage all of them? Absolutely not. Your priority is that boss damage. You want to do as much boss damage as you can, as well as those ads are going to be all over the place because your raid's going to be spread out, and you're not going to be able to damage all of them. What you're going to want to do, though, is you are going to try to thrash them so that you can get the Predator procs off of them for energy regeneration as well as just Tiger's Fury uptime to maintain it for the boss, which would be my goal inside that specific scenario. However, second to last boss inside there, inside the Vault of the Incarnates, there's several ads that you're going to be playing, trying to kill. So on that boss fight specifically, you would spec into Primal Wrath. And the points that you would try to obtain in order to get over there to Primal Wrath is going to be dependent on how much single target uptime you have because you could lose out on Lunar Inspiration. But initially, I would say you're going to drop your sudden ambush. You can get your Primal Wrath back. If they're going to be living long enough, then taking the point into Rampant Ferocity, not for the splash damage of Rampant Ferocity. Then you can take the 1 point into Rampant Ferocity, get a little bit more burst damage since you are going to be Primal Wrathing across the targets, and then you can come over here into Sudden Ambush for the 1 point. And the reason why you would put it on this side instead of taking Tear Open Wounds in that small cleave scenario or those small groups of ads that die very quickly is because tear open wounds you don't need to get down the tree if you are still going to have your single target taste for blood. On the left hand side though, in order to get down the tree, taking Rampant Ferocity allows you to go down, because if not you'd still have to put 2 points inside Sudden Ambush, which isn't going to give you too much more additional AoE value, right? It is going to give you increased damage on your rakes, which you will be able to place on multiple targets. So you do have that, but I would say placing Rampant Ferocity to get your bites to cleave off is going to be strong. The big question when you start getting into higher cleave is how much higher cleave is it worth, and is it a priority to kill the ads over the boss? Because that's going to determine whether you take Apex Predator or you go into more single target focus of like adaptive swarm. And that's going to honestly be the decision you make on how quickly your raid comp is going to annihilate those bosses, or that trash, not the boss, but the trash. So if we were to just kind of finish this initial build up over here, you could jump into something like this for that cleave damage, where you are getting Apex procs. If they're living long enough, then this would be value. You do get Apex procs in single target, but just not nearly as many as you could, and you are losing not only a point in Carnivorous Instincts, but a point in Adaptive Swarm, which is going to reduce your full single target damage by a decent amount. But if the ads are living long enough, it would be worth it. If they're not living long enough, then you just jump back over to the other side, right? And you're going to put your points back where they were. Um, and have adaptive swarm for that single target or that priority target inside that ad group, and then Carnivorous Instincts for your full damage across all of those targets. All right, so this has been a monstrous sized video. It's going to require a ton of editing, I'm sure. Just for breaks on my part, it's going to require a ton of editing in general. This is going over just obviously all of the different talent builds. I hope that this caught your attention. If you had any questions about single target, AoE, cleave, different AoE variations, high Mythic Plus to low Mythic Plus, I really hope that this kind of answered any of those questions, and that you found a build within the builds that I mentioned of something that fits you personally and makes what you intended or what you feel would be the best. Whichever variation of the build suits whatever situation that you're in. I don't think it's going to be a one build meets all, which is why everybody's in love with all of these different talents that all of the classes have inside Dragonflight, because there is no way to for every scenario to be exactly the same all of the time, and your builds let you play to change up those scenarios every single time as well. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing all the builds that come out in Dragonflight. I'm excited to get into the raid and start looking through logs and seeing what other people are trying, how they're making things work, how I can better optimize what I am playing. But these are the builds that I've played, and just real quickly for just a quick cut and dry single target and AoE builds, the single target build that I would play is going to be this one right here on the screen, giving you Adaptive Swarm in the 1 minute Convoke, as well as Heart of the Wild and your increased Nurturing Instincts on the Druid side. And then the AoE build that I would play is going to be more than likely this right here, where you're going to have Moonfire, obviously Apex, Circle Life and Death with Carnivorous Instincts to give you a good mix of having on-demand burst with your 2 minute Convoke, consistent damage with your Carnivorous Instincts, as well as those procs. Lunar Inspiration makes Blood Talent application far better. However, this will be something like once you get good stats will probably be played. At the beginning, you'll probably take off Lunar Inspiration and play with Tireless Energy, and if you once again take off Lunar Inspiration, you can forego Heart of the Wild and your Nurturing Instincts on the left hand side for more tankiness. And in the beginning, progression and Mythic Plus, just initial go, you'll probably go for a little bit more tankiness in that sense, as well as just more energy regeneration. But I think that this is the build that I'm probably going to play. Having Convoke inside Mythic Plus still seems very beneficial. Over not playing it. And then this is going to be more burst, and the comp that I'm going to be running and the group that I'm going to be running in Mythic Plus, it definitely feels like this is more appropriate because of the other specs I'm going to be playing with. And in total, I think that this one and obviously the previous one, single target, are going to be my main go-tos. And if you guys have any comments or additions you want to add to all of this, let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. The closer and closer we get to Dragonflight, the more and more I'll be streaming, especially once Dragonflight releases. I'll be streaming leveling and dungeons and so on all the time, as much as I can anyway. So stay tuned into that, and that's going to be over at twitch.tv/sageshifter. I'll have a link for that in the description below, as well as I'll have all the timestamps once again in the description below if you need to backtrack or anything like that. This is a very long discussion, and I understand it is a very long video. So thank you guys if you have stayed this long throughout the video. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that it answered your questions, and I hope that I got everything that I needed to correctly, and I hope I didn't mess up too much on pronunciation, because that's been a flaw of mine over the past couple videos. So hopefully everything is worked out well this time around. It is a lot of information to go over, and a lot of different synergies and a lot of different options. So thank you guys for staying in tune. And if you guys like this video and want to stay up to date on Feral, especially going into Dragonflight and beyond, and anything I learn that's important, you will find it on my channel, especially pertaining to Feral Druid, and probably Guardian Druid still too, in the expansion to come. And past that, thank you guys very much, and I will see you in the next video.